Hey y'all, it's Lauren, and this is Shades of the City. One of the biggest media outlets catering to the Black experience in America was Johnson Publishing Company, founded in 1942 by John H. Johnson in Chicago, Illinois. Johnson Publishing Company created the iconic Ebony magazine, which focused on lifestyle, fashion, beauty, and entertainment. And the pocket-sized, small but powerful JET magazine focused on news, sports, politics, and culture. Both publications will become widely successful and a staple in the Black community. To this day, JET and Ebony magazines sit on coffee tables and bathroom stands in Black households. And my grandma, Lola Rogers, is one of those people. I went to visit her and we talked for a few minutes about why she still has a collection of JET and Ebony magazines.
You know why I liked it so much? Black people had recipes in there.
In JET and Ebony?
Yes. They were just plain Jet then, wasn't they?
There's two different magazines. So they had JET, which was the small one, the little
Jet
pocket
was-
size.
that's what I
one.
got, yeah.
Ebony was more lifestyle
Yeah, it
with
was.
the women and
Yeah. Girl, I love my books. I kept them all. I miss getting my magazine. That was my life, girl.
Growing up, I remember seeing JET and Ebony magazines around the house and feeling so empowered because it showed me what I could be. This is why I wanted to take a look back at how innovative and monumental Johnson Publishing Company was and the legacy it left behind. I got the opportunity to speak with Charles Whitaker, Dean of the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern and former editor of Ebony magazine, about his career and how impactful Johnson Publishing Company was in his life.
My fourth grade teacher, so I wrote a poem and she said, "Oh my God, you're such a great writer." And I started thinking about being a writer in fourth grade because she was so encouraging of me. And then in fifth grade, we were asked to do a report based on a periodical. And I picked up an Ebony magazine and I did a report on a story that was written by a man named Charles Sanders, who actually wound up being my boss when I went to work for Ebony. But it was a story about Black expatriates in Paris. And he had been to Paris and he was sort of writing about what it was like for all these African Americans who were who were Americans, but living abroad. And I was so fascinated by that story and the idea that you could have a job that allowed you to travel to different places and write about fascinating people. So writer didn't seem like a job to me, but journalist seemed like a job. And from that moment on, I sort of told people I wanted to be a journalist. That was sort of the impetus for me wanting to be a journalist. And I didn't waver very much from that ambition from the time I was like 10 or 11 years old.
As Charles spoke about his ambitions and goals at a young age, I too remember wanting to be a journalist around middle school age. I loved writing, talking, and learning new things. I would always ask the why question and enjoyed reading the paper with my dad.
I also grew up in a house like you with a father who read the newspaper every day and talked about the news every day. So that was a really critical part of my development as a young person. Both my father and his brothers were incredibly well read. They were not college educated at all, but they were all brilliant men who really kept abreast of public affairs and discussed it. They all cut each other's hair. So they would come to our house. My father went to barber college and he would cut his brother's hair and then his brothers would turn around and cut his hair. So they would come over and I would listen to them kind of debate and talk about politics and talk about what they'd read and where they'd read it. So that was really important. We also grew up with Life magazine and Time magazine. My father worked for the post office, but his job at the post office was working in the periodical section that determined the postal rates for magazines that were published at R.R. Donnelley, which was a publishing company right where the McCormick Place is now. So he actually worked out of R.R. Donnelley with a lot of magazines. And so he would bring the magazines home. And I was always it was thrilling to me to go through those magazines and read them and again, read these amazing stories by amazing writers. So all of that kind of all contributed to my love and passion for writing and storytelling.
Magazines and other print publications were a part of Charles's life, and as a Chicago native, he had a front seat witnessing the work of John H. Johnson.
I first went into the Johnson Publishing Company building in 1974. It's about 2 years after the building was built. I was a freshman in high school, and the building Johnson used to have tours. School kids would come by and they would open the building up for tours, and you would go into this gleaming publishing palace. And I remember as a freshman in high school, with my high school class, going through that building and seeing the writers and editors at their desks. And the building overlooks Grant Park, and you get a little bit of a view from the 11th floor. The top floor, you get a view of Lake Michigan. You got to go to John Johnson's office, and he had the entire 11th floor was his office. And it was thrilling for me as a 14-year-old to be in that building, to see that place, to see all of those Black writers and editors and photographers and art directors working on this thing that I had grown up with. Fast forward some 10, 12 years or so, and now I'm a young editor myself, sitting in the desk, at my desk, and kids are coming by, and they're looking at me with that same sense of wonder, like, oh my God, who are these people who are, and it was just a full circle moment to say, oh my God, I'm one of those people now. I'm one of those people who these kids are coming by and wondering, how do I get to be this person? How do I get to occupy a desk at Johnson Publishing Company and be a writer for this place? And it was a great feeling.
Johnson Publishing Company was for us and by us, and it was the place to be for Black entertainers.
It was such a mecca for Black celebrities, a who's who of Black America. I remember my second week there, James Baldwin came by to have lunch. So the editors are there having lunch with James Baldwin. And I'm like, oh my God, I cannot believe, and never in a million years would I dream that I would be sitting at a lunch, casually talking to James Baldwin. And then Sammy Davis Jr. was in town, and he comes by and has lunch. And it was that kind of place, at any given moment, some famous person that you had grown up admiring could stroll through the building or be on a tour of the building. And so you were there, whether it was presidential candidates or politicians or celebrities. And so again, you really felt as though you were a part of history by being a part of that company.
And the building on Michigan Avenue was just as historic as the work being done inside of it.
John Matusameh was the architect who designed the Ebony and Jet building. And that building for many years was the only office tower in a major city that was owned completely by an African American. John Johnson used to say that the Ebony success story couldn't have happened in any city other than Chicago. What many people don't know was that once upon a time, Chicago was this fountain of Black entrepreneurship. You had the twin Johnsons who were millionaires, Johnson Products and Johnson Publishing Company. You had insurance companies and banks and just a whole raft of businesses that all were incubated in Chicago, post the Great Migration from the South. And I think they pushed each other. Those entrepreneurs pushed each other, supported each other, challenged each other. They all wanted to outdo one another. They were actually all very competitive. And yeah, I think that just made Chicago a really fertile ground for that kind of business success.
But becoming a media powerhouse wasn't that easy. John H. Johnson dealt with many challenges on his way to becoming the blueprint for Black media success.
I think the major challenge that Johnson faced in particular was convincing, the publishing business. The publishing business model was built on advertising, and it was mostly built on advertising by white manufacturers and service providers to a Black audience. And John Johnson had to convince advertisers that there was a viable Black audience that was worth advertising to, and that the best way to reach that audience was through a vehicle that spoke to this community in an authentic voice, that the best way to reach them was not going to be in white publications, but that it was to be in this vehicle, this publication that they valued, that they trusted, and that the halo effect of that value and trust would also shine on those publications. That was a radical message, and a message that was not particularly believed or well received in corporate America, in white corporate America. And it took a long time for Johnson, along the way, while he was building the company, it took a while for that message to resonate and get across. But he really was responsible for kind of building the Black consumer market and demonstrating the value of the value and viability of the Black consumer market, which had been taken for granted for a very long time.
John H. Johnson was even at the forefront of the civil rights movement. In August 1955, Emmett Till, a Black teenager from Chicago, was brutally murdered in Money, Mississippi, for allegedly flirting with a white woman. His mother, Mamie Till, wanted the world to see what happened to her son. JET magazine featured photos of Emmett's body, and it became known as the photo that changed America's civil rights movement. Johnson Publishing Company was a safe space for Black artists where ideas and creativity could flourish. And as a Black journalist myself, I have not been able to experience a place like Johnson Publishing Company. So I asked Charles what it was like to work in an environment where everyone looked like him and understood him.
I never felt more liberated as a professional person than I did when I was working at Johnson Publishing Company for a variety of reasons. One, again, as you said, being able to tell our story in an authentic voice from a perspective, and one could say it was not objective, maybe, but it certainly, it was telling our story from a particular point of view, and that was a point of view of uplift and empowerment, and that was incredibly powerful and uplifting to me as the author of those stories. But also to be in an environment where, for the very first time in my life, race was not a factor in my employment. So, in any other environment, as an African-American professional, you were always wrestling with, did this thing happen to me because I'm Black? Whether good or bad, right? Did this terrible thing happen to me because someone is dismissing me because I'm Black? Or did this good thing happen to me because they needed a Black person at this point in time, and there I was sitting there? And that makes you, it fills you with such self-doubt that you are constantly questioning other people's motivations and what your next move should be. I never was racked by that at Ebony magazine, right? In that environment, if someone liked or didn't like me, it had nothing to do with race. It was because I did something terrible, or they thought that I was, or I did something great. And I really felt as though I was in an environment where I was being evaluated on merit and whatever other politics go into employment. And there are lots of politics that go into any environment in which you work. But I was, there solely evaluated on the same things that, someone who is in an all-white, who happens to be white in an all-white environment is evaluated on. And again, that was an incredibly liberating feeling. And I don't know that I've had the opportunity to experience that in any other level of employment that I've had in my 63 years on the planet.
Through our conversation, it was clear to me that Chicago is a place that fosters creativity and entrepreneurship.
Look at the young women one of whom happens to be a former student of mine who started the Tribe, the online publication devoted to Black millennials. They had a desire to tell stories about Black millennials that they thought was not being told. And they just persevered and launched this thing, and it's doing quite well now. That's a John Johnson story for the 21st century, right? They are the 21st century John Johnsons. John Johnson saw a need to have stories told that weren't being told, and he launched these vehicles to do that, and that's what they've done. And it's not, I think, by coincidence that both of them, that those things were able to be accomplished in Chicago. There's just something in the air and in the ethos of Chicago that makes that kind of accomplishment possible.
I also spoke to Dr. Margina Christian, senior lecturer in the English department at UIC, former editor of Ebony and Jet magazine, and author of Empire, the House That John H. Johnson Built, who was born in St. Louis and moved to Chicago for a position with Jet magazine.
I remember at the time being flown in from St. Louis to Chicago for my interview. And I was so excited because I was interviewed. I actually reached out to Lyndon Johnson Rice, who is the daughter of John H. Johnson. And she brought me in for the interview. But I remember sitting on the ninth floor where the executive suites were. And I'm sitting there and I see Mr. Johnson walk by, and he was really bow-legged. So I saw him walk by, and my heart starts racing, and I'm like, wow, to see him. So I went in for the interview, and she interviewed me, but for the most part, he took over the interview. So I was to be interviewed by her, but it was his show, basically. And that was a huge honor to have both of them a part of it. I was excited. I was nervous. I felt honored. And I was in disbelief that, wow, this moment is happening. And to know that I was on the cusp of being a part of that happening moment and that history is something I'll never forget, because it was a beautiful day, and the interview. And then when I got home to St. Louis, it was flew in, it flew right back out. I got home the next day, I got the message that I had been hired. And it's funny, I went in wanting to write for Ebony magazine. And Mr. Johnson looked at my credentials and saw all of the celebrities I interviewed in St. Louis and said, with Ebony, the people who've been there the longest are going to get those stories with the celebrities. He said, but with Jet magazine, because it's weekly, you'll have more flexibility. And I think you'll be more pleased with Jet, because then you'll be able to interview celebrities like you want. He said, so I think I'll have you work at Jet magazine instead of Ebony. And I was thankful for that. And my career went full circle, because from 95 into 2009, I was with Jet magazine. And then 2009 to 2014, I was with Ebony magazine.
And just like Charles, Dr. Christian says working for Johnson Publishing Company was the opportunity of a lifetime.
That moment just makes me, I just get filled and full of pride and joy to see beautiful Black people, exquisitely dressed. Like I said, what the world doesn't show us, that's what we saw at Johnson. Well-educated, people who were Greeks. We had people in all sororities and fraternities. We had people of different, we had, you name it. It was a moment of pride to be able to write and to share our stories in such a way. And I learned to dress every day as if we were having company, because every day you didn't know who was coming through the door. You might have Reverend Jackson coming through the door, but then Lenny Kravitz was on. So Reverend Jackson's on his way out, Lenny Kravitz on his way in. And each day, all the time, we had people doing photo shoots. You just never knew who you were going to deal with. And so we dressed to impress, okay? Because every day was showtime, every day. But documenting those stories our way and taking back that voice and that narrative was a beautiful moment. We had this duty to tell those stories and to do that, not just for Chicago, but for all over the world, everywhere. And what was so interesting was that our magazines didn't just educate Black people. Our magazines educated white people about who we are as African Americans. And that was a huge honor.
Dr. Christian had been a part of Johnson Publishing Company since the late 90s. But as the 2000s rolled around, she noticed the changing landscape of print media.
When Mr. Johnson died in 2005, a little bit before that time, we started seeing that there was a digital divide and that people were starting to move online and starting to do things in this virtual world. And when you come from legacy media, legacy publishing, you're not as quick to move and you have more hesitations. When I was coming to Johnson in 1995, they were just moving from typewriters to computers, okay? And I still remember those cute, big colored bubble back computers they had, the Macs, and some people did not touch them, and others just kind of jumped right in. So I started seeing that this technologically savvy world and this advancement was something that wasn't quite embraced as quickly as it should have been. And I saw that as a challenge that was something that would end up being something that would make it a little bit more difficult to stay ahead of the game. There was a time when JET, Ebony magazines, were the thermostats. They turned up the heat. Everybody followed them. Everyone looked to JET and Ebony to see what was happening, what was going on. But then there came a time when people were in positions where the magazines took a back seat, where they became thermometers, where they dipped their foot in the water to see what everybody else was doing. That's not the way John H. Johnson set it up to be. So those were some challenges. New leadership, moving with the times and technology, just the climate for publishing period started changing.
And as the print industry started to change and print publications faded in the background, so did the place Charles and Dr. Christian loved to travel to every day.
It was the personification of pioneers working together with other African Americans, doing something that had never been done before, leaving a footprint for the world to see. That here on Michigan Avenue, look at what this man did. Not only did he have his own company, it was a publishing company, and he owned the building. He built it from the ground up. And to be able to see that and to show that, it's still standing, but it's very bittersweet to see that you go to that building and you can barely even see Black people going in it. You can see Black folks can barely afford to go in it. I see so many dogs going in and out of that building. Next door is a grocery store. On that side, that's where the kings and queens walked into that lobby. Kings and queens went into that photo studio. But I see it's a grocery store. It's a very bittersweet moment. But to your point, that to be able to see that, look at what this Black man did with other Black people. And this was someone who came from nothing. I went to Arkansas to see where he lived in a little tin house with the tin on the roof, the little 3 rooms, and to see where he came from and what he built, an empire. It brought tears to my eyes to know that I saw where he came from and where he went to and what he did. And that was a beautiful moment to be able to witness it.
Even though Johnson Publishing Company isn't the same powerhouse it once was, the legacy of John H. Johnson will remain a part of Black American history.
I want people to remember John H. Johnson, although the building isn't standing the way we once knew it to stand and how it operated, although the magazines aren't legacy in that we see these publications we can hold in our hands and put on our coffee tables. I want us to remember what John H. Johnson stood for and what he did, to never forget the man, the mission, or his message. He created an empire. He built a house at 820 South Michigan, the house that John H. Johnson built, Johnson Publishing Company. Never forget, know that this man existed. He has and continues to carry a mighty, magnificent legacy. So he also did so many wonderful things. He was for Black people, by Black people, loved Black people, was a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. He was a Mason. He was a part of lots of organizations. He and his lovely wife, Eunice W. Johnson, gave back to the community, HBCUs and organizations through that historic ebony fashion show. Those are things that I want people to remember, to know it was more than publishing for him. It was an empire. It was magazines. It was fashion. It was cosmetics. He had a radio station, a TV station, an awards, you name it. He did it. He opened the way. He paved the way.
This show is produced by me, Lauren Brown, co-produced by Jillian DeGroot, and overseen by Managing Editor Jay Zawoski. From News Radio, WBBM, and Odyssey, this is Shades of the City.